Okay. Right, so we start off with the Income Tax Act, and the first thing that is going to be examinable is that particular picture, okay, which is where does South Africa's tax come from? And it's not the first time we've seen this thing today, okay. We're saying we want to collect nearly 1.1 trillion rand per year. We collect a major amount of it, 372 trillion from the individual taxpayer. Then there is the VAT, and then there is corporate. Those are your three big ones. The important issue to look into is that people concentrate in companies on corporate tax. What is the effect on the bottom line? Okay? But you must remember in corporate tax that the corporate, if you to pay tax, you have to have made a profit. Taxable income, as we call it in tax. There are other taxes and other tax exposures which you are exposed to in business whether or not you have made a profit. And these are becoming increasingly important. So we're going to talk in modules today about corporate and personal. We'll do a brief one on VAT tomorrow. But what you've got to watch out for here as well is that there are other taxes which are more and more creeping in above the line. And people ignore these. We'll talk tomorrow a little bit about skills development levy. That is a tax on your wages. Okay, gross tax on wages. Look at it, it's collecting 15 billion rand a year. Did you know that that can pay for your MBA? You can access that to get your MBA. Your employer can. Which is what we'll look at in the pivotal skills thing tomorrow. So you can't just pay these costs and say they're irrelevant. That's 1%, right? You've got fuel levy. Fuel, if you look at the price of fuel, a third of it is tax. So you are paying tax in your operating expenses. Okay? So, if you look at that, you are saying, hang on, I might not be making a profit, but every time I turn on a light switch, there's another one here. Where is the electricity levy? Also important. We're having this whole debate, which we'll have with Letitia at some stage, about carbon tax, which is not yet here. We already have taxes on energy. 10 billion rand for electricity, 49 billion rand for fuel. So companies are paying these taxes already. One of the big arguments about carbon tax is it's going to be added onto fuel levy. So we're going to effectively have double tax on fuel. Have you looked at an air ticket and seen how much tax is in there? Half the ticket. Now your companies are paying that whether or not they make a profit. And what is happening is that those are called stealth taxes. Stealth because you can't see them. And they are becoming increasingly important in the bottom line. Because if you look at all your transaction taxes and stealth taxes, you see how they are making up 50% of the total tax pie. So they're exposing your business. Now people come up to me and they say, and it often happens in a pub, how do I pay less tax? I say, stop driving, switch off the lights, and stop smoking and drinking. Oh. And you can have that with an individual who has not yet reached tax status, earning under 70,000 rand a year. But even a person on a grant who buys a packet of cigarettes, not a contraband packet of cigarettes, but a proper packet of cigarettes, is paying 50% tax component. And this becomes, and it's a very important thing, when we start talking transformation. Because the tax system is transforming as well. Where politically it is easier to get stealth taxes than it is to get the corporate and income taxes. Because people don't see them. But they're threatening your business. And people are not identifying that threat to the business. And I'll tell you an example that you could look at. It would make a super essay. Is the demise of one-time airlines a couple of years ago. Okay? It certainly wasn't income tax that took out one-time airlines, was it? What killed one-time airlines? The price of its fuel and the taxes on tickets. Okay? So if you go to the UK, for example, and you look at these discount airlines like Ryanair and things like that, they're running out of cheaper airports with lower fuel taxes on their fuel. So they can produce these ridiculous prices on air tickets. But in South Africa, we have this problem that 50% of an air ticket is in one way or another tax. So along comes a guy with the idea of a discount airline, which was a good idea. Then the oil price went up. Then the airport passenger departure taxes went up. And the next thing, even though he could sell the tickets, he was selling them and making a great big loss. And then you say, well, why didn't he go, for those of you who've watched the business rescue videos already, why didn't he just go into business rescue? Well, he tried to. But you'll see from the videos that people can oppose business rescue if it is a waste of time. And using the aeroplanes that he was using at the time, which were all gas houses, there was no prospect at an oil price of $110 a barrel at the time of ever running a discount airline in South Africa. So therefore, business rescue was not applicable because there was no sight that a revised business rescue plan could save his business. Now we bring that into the debate in South Africa, where we particularly have cheap electricity. Okay? We've come from a time where South Africa's electricity was considered a cheap strategic resource. So we had all types of industry that came to South Africa to use cheap electricity to beneficiate product. What happens? The electricity price goes skyrocketing because of the Eskom debacle, and we put a whole lot of tax on it. And suddenly your business is not feasible. Now that is also an integral part of taxation. When you say, what does that slide represent to small business? 5 marks out of 40 for saying, oh, well, 28% of my profits are going to go to SARS. You know, that's my biggest stakeholder in many businesses. But you've also got to see how some of these other taxes have the ability to affect what you are doing in your business. If you look at what's going on at the moment, who are making the most noise about smoking and all the rest of it in South Africa? British American Tobacco. They are going on and saying, we are responsible tobacco suppliers. We are paying the taxes on it to reduce consumption and the attraction to tax. And meanwhile, through the border comes 400 million packets of cigarettes a year. They're doing us out of business. We can't do business at that rate. So they're almost joining the anti-tobacco lobby. It's a fascinating aspect. And so many businesses are ignoring these big ones here as to what do they do to the consumer and what do they do to their business. It's all right for me to say, gee, I love tolerance. My business tolerance is things like that. It takes me 20 minutes from Johannesburg International to the Davis Committee's offices in Pretoria. And I pay an extra 15 Rand in tolls. Wow, what a bargain. But if you're driving trucks around all over the place, okay, and you're already paying electricity levy and fuel levy, now you've got to pay for tolls as well. And you are saying my business is no longer sustainable. So that is an interrelationship that I want you to understand. Right. And you see the stresses where we put up these taxes every year to make up for the deficit The deficit slide that I showed you the other day is also important and also examinable. That we have a strained tax system that is working more and more to find different forms of taxation. Spread it around. Make it so that people don't see. Okay? The people don't understand VAT because as fundamental of VAT is, the price you see is the price you pay. Okay, so your consumer doesn't understand it. The consumer does not understand that 11 cigarettes in a packet smoke the packet. That's unbelievable. But, that's a component of what we are doing. So let's kick off in the first module today. We're going to go from the corporate tax, okay? And we've already done, and we've done this very quickly, the different types of trading entity. We did that the other day. So we had individual, sole proprietor, trust, and company, right? Now, the basic tax rates of the three individuals, of the three forms of trading entity, that I would say is examinable. Okay? Please do not concentrate on the tax. I've taken out today the taxation consequences of trusts, because the Davis Tax Committee is just about to issue a new report about how that works and how it should be revised. So please don't go into the taxation consequences of trusts. Okay? However, we will look briefly at small business corporations today and how they are taxed. Have a look at it. Okay. So we've looked at the individual, we've looked at the advantages of the individual. This is revision. Okay, you can trade as an individual, or you can go into the sixth schedule and partnerships. We've spoken about them very briefly, and we've seen the individual tax tables and their amendments. We've done that already. And then now we come to a very important slide, which is examinable. We've looked at this one before. What are the different top tax rates? Now, a company has a tax rate of 28% versus an individual has a top rate of 41% because it's just gone up. These are the maximum marginal rates. Okay? So everybody says, hooray, become a company. Companies save 12%. Right? So if I went out and formed a company, the worst that can happen to me is I'm taxed at 28%. But what is my problem? I can't spend it without paying more tax. And that is the dividend tax that is yielded when you pay a dividend to an individual. You pay dividend tax at 15% on the remaining 72%, which takes the effective corporate tax rate, dividend tax included, up to 38.8% by the time you get to actually spending the money. Now, the logic behind that in corporate taxes is to say we want companies to retain profits so that they can grow. So we put almost a penalty on companies when we're trying to discourage them from paying dividends. We want them to reinvest their money and carry on trading and grow. That is why you have two corporate tax rates. Okay? Don't worry about the trusts. Leave the trusts out of it this year. Okay? So the true arbitrage between an individual getting the money in their back pocket is 41 versus 38. There's very, very little in it. But now, you take the next thing into the equation, which is the introduction of capital gains tax. Now, capital gains are when you sell an asset, we'll talk about it briefly today, where it is part of your fixed assets or part of your capital structure. Those gains, up until 2001, were completely tax-free. So if you were the likes of Mark Shuttleworth received 3 billion. There was no capital gains tax, no dividend tax at the time, and he walked away with his 3 billion rand and then told everybody how nice he was to society. You can be nice to society. doing that. Today, there would be capital gains tax. Now, what has happened in capital gains tax is that the individual taxpayer only pays capital gains tax on a third of the capital gain. So when you apply the 41% to the third, to that, you get an effective top rate of capital gains tax for the individual of 13.65, which is not too bad. So if I own shares, my house, I even get a capital gains tax-free allowance on it, all of that sort of stuff. If I make a capital gain, I'm only going to lose maximum 13%. My share portfolio would be another example of that. However, if I have all my assets in a company, do you see that the inclusion rate, the amount of the capital gains, is double in companies, leading to a top rate of CGT for companies, or a flat rate of CGT for companies, of 18.65 versus 13.65. That's 5% higher already. And then when the company wants to distribute the capital gain back to the individual, they pay 15% dividend tax on the 81, which means that the full all-in tax rate of a company profit, capital profit, is 30.85 versus 13.65. Do you see how much higher it is? Now wait, let's finish the story. There are, we get people who do things with money because it's socially good. Okay? You can hold your head high in the Albany Club when you say, I am a director of a company or a trustee of a trust. I want to be one of these. So people go out and they form companies to own their properties. You hear a lot of this. People say, I've got my house is in a company, or my house is in a trust. What are they doing? They're making a very expensive mistake, because look at the potential tax rates. Okay? You could own an investment in your own name. Let's say if you're buying a second property. Maximum CGT exposure on that is 13.65%. But if you buy it in a company, you are volunteering to pay more than double. Are you nuts? Also that you can say, I've got a family investment company. You're a football if you do that. But it used to work exactly the other way around 15 years ago. Now the debate in passing that is going on with the Davis Committee is that you see that the trust has a higher capital gains tax rate than the individual, right? But in terms of existing law, you are allowed to tax trust income in the hands of the donor or beneficiary that made the trust. You're allowed to do that. The Davis Committee is about to recommend that that is to be taken away. And if you have a trust, you will pay capital gains tax at the trust rate. So yes, you'll have a family trust, but the privilege for doing that is to have double the tax rate on having a company trust. Why would you want to do that? And the next argument that you see from people who are doing these things is they say, it's so I don't pay estate duty when I die. Okay? And you say to these people, the answer to that is, are you sick? And I say, no, never better. I'm one of these, I'm on the Tim Noakes diet. I do push-ups. I don't smoke. Okay? I'm not anticipating dying. So you say, well, then your life expectancy is 78. And between you and your wife, you're going to live for 25 years post-retirement. How much of that capital is going to be left for there to be estate duty at the end? I'll tell you this much. In South Africa, there are only 600 leviable estate duty estates a year in South Africa. It's tiny. Estate duty used to be a tax from 100 years ago where people died young and left lots of money. So that's an example, for example, where we are right now. That building over there, was built because Rhodes, when he died, being the oddball that he was, said, I leave my entire estate to Falk and Vaderland. To everybody. No, not to Falk and Vaderland, that's South Africa. I leave it to the British Empire. So they've been trying to spend that money for 100 years. Okay, because he was the Bill Gates of the time. Well, but how old was Rhodes when he died? 50. Okay, I don't even think he got to 50. 48. Okay. Now that is how people lived then. They died young. They died while they were still working, so they never had time to spend all the money. So the need for estate planning is not that great anymore. So please, you need to understand this table well. Okay? That there is a lower tax rate on revenue income in companies if you don't pay a dividend. If you do pay a dividend, the difference is minimal. Okay? And on capital income, you pay a lot more capital tax on company profits than you do on individual profits. That is an important principle which a lot of people get wrong.
Sorry.
Yeah. We're stopping. Question.
What is the incentive of changing or making it less tax on individuals versus companies? Is it so?
They're saying but the individual already has a higher top tax rate. So we don't want to trouble them twice. We are also saying that individuals should have an incentive to save. But where you are writing the observation is, why do we have these arbitrages between capital and revenue income? When CGT came in 2001, there was a lot of talk about, yes, you must give a lower rate to the individual, look after the individual, da-da-da-da-da. And we must always tax capital taxes at a lower rate. The thinking is moving around to now, why? Income is income. And we should just provide exemptions to look after the lower to middle taxpayer and look after their houses, and there shouldn't be this discrepancy between capital and revenue income. They're looking to narrow that gap, but they haven't done it yet. And it's just where the economic philosophy on capital gains taxes go. Yes?
Well, I'm trying to understand the concept because you said this is very crucial.
Yeah.
Whereby, I understand in the business, capital is the money that you...
I will deal with what is the capital gain in a moment.
Okay, and then the revenue.
Okay.
Now, I don't understand when it comes to the individual.
It's the same test, whether it's capital or revenue, is essentially the same test for individuals and for all taxpayers.
So for you, for example, what would be a capital for you? Would it be the money?
My house.
Your house, the asset you're having.
Yeah. The crucial test, we'll put it down now, but we'll explore it a little bit more, goes like this. A capital asset is acquired for better or for worse, or so to say, for keeps. Only to be disposed of if some unusual circumstance intervenes. So I buy a house. I'm not intending to resell it on the day that I buy it. Okay? 5 years later, I get remarried to somebody with 3 small children, and my house is not big enough. So I sell the old house, and I buy a new house. An unusual circumstance has come in between that has made me change my mind. That would be a capital gain. Okay? Give you an example going the other way. Okay? And a lot of people say it's got to do with how long you hold an asset. It actually doesn't have a lot to do with that. I could buy a house today saying I'm single and change it tomorrow because I met somebody else tomorrow and make a big profit and still be a capital gain. On the other hand, you take it that I'm driving around Grahamstown this afternoon and there's an estate agent selling a house, and I go in there and I think, oh, I can make a quick buck if I buy this and fix it up and sell it. Right? What's going through my mind? I'm saying I'm never going to come and live in Grahamstown, even if I do get remarried. I only bought it for the purposes of reselling it. That would be a full revenue gain. So I think you must keep it to one test. What was in my mind when I bought it? Did I buy it to resell it, or did I buy it to keep it? Okay? Putting it in a really even deeper form, you can, or maybe a silly form. You are married to your capital assets. Okay, for better or for worse, or so to say, for keeps. Only to be disposed of if something else intervenes. Right? That's like a divorce. Right? You don't get divorced willy-nilly, you hopefully, although you wonder sometimes. Okay? You get divorced because some major event has happened that would change that. But we'll come back to that in a bit more detail in a moment. Was there another question over there? Yes.
I find that with some of our clients, most of our clients have got two entities. Property holding entity and a trading entity.
Are these corporate clients or individual clients?
Well, corporate clients.
Okay, but a corporate client would have two entities. They would have already inherently accepted that these tax rates are there. A corporate entity might buy a property, for example, in a separate property holding company because they're wanting to keep it away from the business risks of the main company. That might be a reason for doing it. What we are finding though today is that when you taught MBA 20, 30 years ago, you ran on the line of when in doubt, form a company. So every time a company went onto a new venture, it formed a new company. And now what we found with that is that is leading to a huge amount of additional administration. And so what companies are now doing is that they are forming as few additional entities as possible. And they're simply accounting for each entity with a different set of books and consolidating the whole lot together in divisions. So the old adage, which we used to have in MBAs years ago, when in doubt, form a company, from a tax perspective, doesn't stand anymore because it's very expensive to administer them. Yes?
Yeah, like how do you create wealth in this country? Because you buy, say, an asset, sell it a few years later, it's appreciated maybe, but that's part of inflation, and all of a sudden you get a capital gains tax and it takes it right down. You actually lost money.
No, well, you're taking the line of argument that we are taxing inflationary gain.
Yeah.
And that was brought in and recognized in 2001 when they brought in capital gains tax. They said we will have a lower rate for individuals because we do not adjust the gain for inflation. The modern economic philosophy on it is all gains are inflationary, whether they're capital or not. And by having a higher capital gains tax rate, we can avoid increasing revenue taxation. So if you've got a capital gain, that's your good luck. Okay, we'd rather take some of your capital gains and give you a reasonable allowance for it, rather than increase the corporate tax rate of 41% here, the individual tax rate of 41%. You have to approach taxation from a bit also the kettle backwards. The minister, what's happening in politics? The president is saying, do this, do that. That's my philosophy, which you're supposed to hear in the sign-in address. From that, National Treasury is saying, it will cost so much, and we can borrow so much, and the rest of it has got to come from the taxpayer. Expenditure less borrowing equals what's going to come from the taxpayer. Then the debate turns to what is an equitable basis of spreading that around. Okay? Where are you going to put that burden? And in South Africa, that becomes even more fantastic because of the massive social differences that we have in this country. If you take it, for example, there are your CGT rates. The next slide shows how capital gains tax collections have increased. It's become a major source of revenue for government. Now, you might say, don't tax investment gains because it's chasing investors away. But if you look at combined, last year, we got 12 billion rand in South Africa from capital gains tax. So, if we didn't have capital gains tax, you would have to have a marginal tax rate of 42%. So what do you want? Do you want to pay 42% every month? Or when you are fortunate enough to have a gain, pay some tax on it. Okay? You don't pay it when you've got a loss. And the line of thinking that's going with it now is try and keep the burden on the individual taxpayer on their monthly salary lower. Okay? And what you do to help the individual is you say, the individual may have 30,000 rands worth of tax-free capital gains every year, and they may have a lower inclusion rate on their capital gains. You will see that half, almost, of the capital gains come from companies. So that is a way of getting company tax collections up a bit, that when they do make a little bit of money, they pay a lot of capital gains. And if you take it to the ridiculous extreme, which was the Shuttleworth example, how can it be that a man can make 3 billion rand tax-free and blow himself off into space without paying 1 cent of tax on it? And that is the extreme that we were at in 1998. And these are the vexing questions that you've got to ask if you've got a population of 53 million people to support. Because every second person that comes to Davis Committee says, capital gains tax is chasing investment away. To which the answer is today, well, where don't they have capital gains tax so that we can look at that place and say, gee, they look at all the investment they're getting. And the answer that always gets thrown at, let's look at Mauritius. We say, well, we can't really compare with Mauritius because they've only got 1 million people to support compared to our 53 million people. Right. So there are your types of trading entities. That's quite an important slide. Okay, now we go to a company. We've done all the different advantages and we've looked at the tax rates and disadvantages. Now we say, how do you might have a 28% tax rate, but how do you what income are you taxed on? And this is you see what you call the general reduction formula, applies to all South African taxpayers, okay, corporate or individual. You all have the same rule, which is, cast the net out there to recognize all gross income. As much of it as you possibly can. Discard exempt income. So you make specific allowance for certain types of income that you don't want taxed. So it's like throwing a huge fishing net out there, have a very fine mesh on it, catch everything, and then you start letting the little ones go. To give you income. And then against income, you have a test for what expenses should be allowed as a deduction. That is not the same test as you have in accounting. And then you have capital allowances and incentives that are supposed to stimulate people to invest in their businesses. You deduct that, and that gives you taxable income. Taxable income has its tax tables applied to it. So that's that's the formula. And now you have to go into that and what we spend doing in tax. That is one formula there, right? One slide there. The Income Tax Act, in applying that formula, is now 880 pages long in all the different things to just get that formula down on the table. 880 pages. It was only 100 pages when I did my board exam. That shows, since 2000, the extensive transformation in the Tax Act. 700 pages of legislation in the Income Tax Act alone. And that's after you've taken out all the administrative provisions and put them into another act. So now you say, what is gross income? And this is where we get all the, this is where the nerds get very excited. And accountants, to show that they are important, cite all sorts of income tax legal precedent, all in the interpretation of what that one sentence is all about. Okay? One sentence, really. In the case of any resident taxpayer, the total amount, in cash or otherwise, received or accrued. So it's not only cash, it's debtors as well. And then we have item 2. In the case of any person, there's the change, other than a resident. Okay? They are also subject to tax on income that they earn in South Africa. So, notice from that thing, very importantly, straight out, it's anybody who makes money in South Africa. If you are a South African resident, you are taxed on your worldwide income in general. And if you are a resident of another country, a tax resident of another country, you are still taxable on your income that you make in South Africa, that is of a South African source. Okay? And then it says, but excluding receipts of a capital nature, and further on we'll say, but including the taxable portion of capital gains. What that provision is trying to do is to cast the net as wide as it possibly can. To catch as many people as possible and as much income as possible to get it on the tax return. And then you start letting go. Now you say, what's a resident? Okay? Now, the idea of a resident in general is South Africa your home? It has nothing to do with nationality. Okay? If you consider South Africa to be your home, where you come home to where you keep your family, your cars, your house, your dog, then it doesn't matter what nationality you are. You're suddenly a taxpayer. And we have this big problem, particularly, we've seen a lot in Cape Town. And we spoke about this the other day when we spoke about Jürgen Haxen, where we get people who just get on a flight and fly into South Africa and buy a property in Cape Town, leaving all their money in Germany, right? And they live here. And they go on holiday once a year to see their relatives in Germany. Are they taxpayers? Yes, they are. They think they're not. They say, I have got a German passport. Yeah. I pay tax in Germany. Yeah. And you say, no, you are living here. If you live here, you pay tax here. And this is a very important issue that is coming up in the xenophobia debate. Because we get people who come into South Africa, they trade and they live here, but many of them are not registered for tax. And they say, but I'm from whatever country in the world they want to be. And you say, but that's got nothing to do with it. You live here, you make profits here. So, we take that thing and then we say, right, this is the question of residence. Now, don't go into the whole issue of residence. I think what we're going to do and say is let's look at it in a very simple inquiry. Yes, was there a question?
Sorry, what happens if you live and you don't make a profit?
Well, you can never pay tax if you don't make a profit. If you make a profit overseas, then you are taxable on it here, because South Africans are taxed. If you are a South African resident taxpayer, then you are taxed on your worldwide income. I'll give you some examples in a moment. When we come to the residence test, it is obviously plainly obvious, right, that I'm a South African resident taxpayer. I carry a South African passport, I live here, I never leave the country. Right, now let's make it interesting. Is Ernie else a South African taxpayer? He's a South African national. Right? He carries a South African passport. But Ernie doesn't live here. Ernie and his family live in Wentworth in the United Kingdom. And he is very careful that he only comes to South Africa for a certain number of days in a year. And most tax authorities have this. They say, if you show that you really do, from the facts, you're not living here. Now let's start a little inquiry. And then they set down what's called the days present tests. So we say, we look at it and say, do you keep your dog, everything else in South Africa? If that's non-conclusive, we come to the days present test. Okay? But if you are a company, any South African registered company or trust that has a South African tax number company number is automatically a South African taxpayer. But if you are a foreign company and your place of management is in South Africa, then you are also a South African taxpayer. So I can go over to Switzerland or an island somewhere in the world and form a company. Come back to South Africa and manage it on the internet. And this is where we look at e-trading. I mean, you can write, there are thousands of theses about this. Right? I'm managing it on my laptop from South Africa. That place of management of that company is in South Africa. It may be foreign registered, but it is also a South African taxpayer because it's managed from South Africa. So if I want to have a foreign company and not pay South Africa as a South African tax, I've got to manage it from overseas. Okay? So, let's go into the place of management test, which is the next slide. We say, are you ordinarily resident? Can we just see it from your normal activity? Right? Next, if you are a wanderer, are you present in South Africa for more than 91 days of each tax year over the past 5 years of assessment? And in total, did you spend more than 915 days in South Africa? If so, we don't care what your argument is. You are a South African taxpayer. Now, if you are my age and you listen to vinyl records, things like that, the greatest example of this is the Rolling Stones. Greatest rock band ever. Okay? And they were the greatest tax evaders ever. Okay? Sex and drugs and rock and roll, they didn't go on to say tax evasion as well. Because if you go there, one of their most famous albums is an album called Exile on Main Street, where the whole Rolling Stones band suddenly picked up. Now they're as pom can be. And in 1973, the whole lot picked up. And they moved to France. They all lived in a villa down on the south coast of France and did drugs and made music. Right? They did that to get out of the clutches of the UK tax authorities, which they've done for many years. In 2000, I was in the UK, and there was a Rolling Stones concert in the UK, and suddenly there's an announcement. The concert is cancelled. Because they suddenly found out that Keith Richards, if he spent one more night in the UK that year, would be UK resident for tax purposes. Okay? Now, when it comes to the superstars, this becomes incredibly important. You might have seen Sting and the regrouping of the police, which happened a couple of years ago. Sting made the other people go and practice in Canada with him, so he could keep out of the UK, so he didn't pay tax. Okay? Where are all the Formula One drivers normally resident? Where do they live? Yeah, Monaco. Why? It's a tax haven. And they all keep below the day's present test. So now Ernie comes to South Africa every year, but he is making sure that he spends less than 91 days a year. Does that mean that Ernie is not taxable on what at all in South Africa on any money that he makes here? Oh no. Because he is a person other than a resident, he is still taxed in South Africa. And there's a withholding tax and everything else. So the winner of the $2 million at the annual $1 million at Sun City, that is $2 million net of a 15% withholding tax. So it actually costs the promoter $2.5 million. They've got to take the tax off before they can pay that person that money. You had a question?
Yeah, because of the statement you made concerning working with computers outside the countries,
Yeah.
many Americans are giving up their passports.
Now Americans, America has its own rule. America says if you are born in America, you will be a taxpayer in America for life. It's a different jurisdiction. It's come up with an embarrassment about this rule because nobody ever observes it. But they say that the next Prime Minister of the UK will be Boris Johnson, the current mayor of London. You know the guy with the white, funny hairstyle? He is born American. Left America when he's 5. And apparently, he has an accumulated liability to the American tax authorities of £7 million that he actually owes them. But they don't normally collect that. But if Boris Johnson does become the Prime Minister of England, technically they can arrest him if he goes back to the United States. And there's a little debate going on about this at the moment in social media. Because he is a born American. Same as Winston Churchill. Nobody ever looked at him, of course. So, what we are seeing from this, and I wouldn't set a test about this whole question, but I'm wanting you to understand that the question of whether you are obliged to register for tax has nothing to do with your nationality and everything to do with where you work, okay, where your family is. And you can't just move into countries and operate there without paying tax there. This is more or less an international definition that you're looking at there. Right. Yes.
Well, I want to take you back to that slide with the pie of the 993.
The pie. Yeah.
And my question there is...
Wow, that's a long way back.
Yeah, but it's just been sitting in my mind, so...
Okay, we're going all the way back to the pie.
Yes.
Okay. My goodness, you sit on your questions for a long time. There, here's your pie.
Yes. Well, we said there, we as a business, we have to look at how we pay for, we call it stand something taxes, hidden taxes, I think, stealth taxes.
Stealth taxes.
Now, yesterday, when we were doing our IR report,
Yeah.
we said if you're an investor, you have to look at the things that are going to affect in the future of the business.
Yeah.
Now, will that come into play as an investor if you're going to be looking at...
Very much so.
So,
Very much so, because an investor coming to South Africa, I saw this in a presentation the other day of the ferrochrome industry into South Africa regarding carbon tax.
yeah.
If you've got cheap electricity and low taxes on electricity, we will have aluminium smelters and people coming to this country and beneficiating product in South Africa. And we have seen, like Alusaf and the huge industry around the production of cheap electricity from the old school. Presentation I saw the other day says that we know already that the unit labor cost in China is lower than South Africa. And now the unit cost of electricity in China is also lower than South Africa. Now you are going to put carbon tax on businesses as a stealth cost, push up your input costs, and then you're going to say, come to the Rainbow Nation and beneficiate product. And the potential investor is going to say, well, if we can get electricity there, if we come and work there, then we're going to pay tax on the electricity, which is going to be an input cost. No, thank you, we would rather buy your raw materials. And this is one of the big arguments about the further increase of fuel and electricity levies, which are through carbon tax. Yes, it's all very well to say we want people to account for carbon and minimize their investment. And that's what the environmentalists are saying. That's what National Treasury is saying. But Department of Trade and Industry is saying everybody should come to South Africa and do business here, but how they're going to power their businesses and at what cost, that answer has not been made yet. So self-taxation has got a lot to do with the lifestyle of your business and your own personal lifestyle as well. Okay? So what did we get, just to go back to it, just to give you some ideas. In the late 90s, early 2000s, South Africa went bananas over properties. And we drove property through the roof in this country, right? And now we're saying, were we right to have all of these big properties because of the cost of keeping them going? And we're paying electricity to keep increased tax included in the Eskom tariff. And then we are commuting 50 kilometers a day to get to work and back. So you are looking at the holding cost of your asset being absolutely massive. And people say, whoops, can we still live that way? Right? I live 60 kilometers away from where I work, yeah. Okay? I live 1,000 kilometers from where I do business in Johannesburg or Cape Town. Now, the question comes is, isn't that a bit insane if you're going to pay all of these taxes into this? And then the question comes back, yeah, but if I travel once a week and not every day, different thing. You get it in the context of these big green buildings. I've got a big green building. I've had this argument with a lot of buildings in Joburg. And we have got a certificate here on the wall that this is a green building. Okay? And you say, oh, really? And what about all the mileage of all your staff to fill that building up every day? Are you taking that into account in the environmental output? I wrote a thing on my blog on BizNews the other day. I grew up as a teacher's son at St. John's College in Joburg. And you get the old boy mail, which is generally bring out the begging bowls and that stuff. And they say, we are going to make ourselves carbon neutral. And I looked at that and I worked out that just the carbon footprint of getting each child to school was on average 3 tons of CET a year per child to get them to school. How is the school going to make itself carbon neutral on that? Or they're going to go and plant trees on rugby fields or something like that. I mean, and the carbon footprint of these places up the road here. Oh, we're all green. Every time I get on an airplane, the whole front 4 rows are filled up with St. Andrews kids who fly home for weekends. So we've got to look at how we're living and how that comes into, this part of it. Those taxes are growing and will grow more. And the question is whether those taxes will not reach a level that they will stop, that they will change behavior. They can change behavior. How many of you work at businesses that hot desk? Any of you working in a hot desk? Okay. What's hot desking? Oh, that means you don't have your own office anymore. Okay. The old way of business was you get in your car at 7 o'clock in the morning with your kids and drop them at school. You drive to work and you have your own little empire, own desk. It's your area. The secretary sitting outside. That's your area built for you. And you will do that 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. Today, businesses are saying, we have an office with a certain number of desks in it, unallocated. And you can work wherever you want to, whenever you want to, and when you need an office, you will come to work. But really, we are paying you on what you produce, not the hours that we spend in the office. Okay? And so, we don't care if you're in the office or whether you're not in the office. It's a facility that's there. So we don't need these massive things. We don't need you to drive in the traffic every morning. We don't need you to spend your earnings on petrol to get to work on a laptop which you could be doing just as well from home. So what's the downside to that arrangement? Well, when you get managers who are saying, I like to be at the door in the morning, you're late. That's how you do it. I want to see all my little chickens there. He doesn't dig for that. He says, discipline will go out of the window. Okay? No. If you are paying on production only, then discipline can go out the window. They're only stuffing themselves up. Okay. So that is the counter argument to that, yes.
If I work from home and I pay rent, so my
We'll talk about whether you can pay much just now. On Susan now. Just to stuff up your morning. Okay.
Let me make a comment on that. Because I just saw the fuel now with about 49%. In Nigeria, we are talking about fuel subsidy, not tax.
Yeah, but you've got so much fuel, you don't know what to do with it.
But if we can manage it well, I think it will be better for us. And taxing the fuel will be better for us instead of subsidizing it.
Well, this is the whole thing, that the worldwide thinking on it is to say you can't have an international, a global policy which says we've got to cut back on fuel production and at the same time being subsidizing people to use it. So this is why we're saying we should be paying tax on carbon emissions, burning fossil fuels, because we're trying to make the world cut back. And now we'll force them to, because what we'll say to business is, account for your carbon footprint. And now that you've accounted for it, we'll say, thank you at 120 Rand per tonne, we want a tax on that. Which is very good for the environment. But business will tell you it's a very shit idea for business, unless the whole world does it. If we had carbon tax at 120 per tonne throughout the world, everybody did it, then it wouldn't be an issue, would it? Because you're not create disturbing markets with it. But we are, well, if we get an international benchmark on carbon tax by 2030, I'll be very surprised. Okay, last question, then let's get on to the behind.
Yes. Prof, with the sketch about corporate tax, what I don't understand there is when you say we got to understand the whole thing, but without the trust.
You don't need to. When you look at when you look at this, when we look at the question that I could ask you,
Yeah.
goes back to the slide here. I need you to understand that, not that. I'm not going to examine you about the trust. Okay? I would ask you, do you invest through a company or individually? Okay. Right, now we must get on because we've got a long way behind if we're going to be finished by 3 o'clock this afternoon. So please ask questions as we go along so we don't have to go right back to the beginning of the presentation again. Right, now, so that's your residence test, okay? Then we say, what is exempt income? And they then go into section 10 of the Act, and they list all the exempt income in copious detail, okay? Now, your main categories of exempt income are really 2 things. These are the incomes of government, charity, etc., so that they don't pay tax, right? And then, very importantly, the income of a retirement fund. Because we're trying to grow people's investments, so a retirement fund gets a tax exemption, okay? And then a dividend, why would a dividend not be, so it's already been taxed in a company, and a withholding tax has been taken off it when the dividend was paid, so the dividend remains exempt, okay? So those are your main categories of exempt income. Do you notice that they're not enormous, okay? But the basic line is, leave the pension funds and the money huggers and the leading hearts alone. Okay, we'll make their income exempt. Leave dividends alone because they've already been taxed. That gives you income. Now comes the question, what deductions can you claim against income? Now, accounting works on, accounting has its own tests, but tax authorities never trust accountants. So they have to have their own test. And that changes to the main general test for deductible expenditure, which is the general test, which is limited by section 23, which has specific provisions, which throw you out. Okay? So, a deduction can be claimed on expenditure and losses actually incurred in the production of income during the year of assessment, and not of a capital nature. So if you are trading, so what we're doing is we're throwing it as wide as we possibly can. A business expense may be deducted. That is the general rule. Now there are all sorts of obscure oddities that go around that the tax nerds can look at. And 100 years of case law as to what is the general idea. Okay? But then the more important issue is that even in spite of it being a deductible, something being deductible, we say, but hold on. We put a whole lot of hurdles in section 23. The cost incurred by the taxpayer of the maintenance of his family or establishment. Okay? So, we get these high-powered executives who hire an au pair to look after their kids. And now, why am I hiring an au pair? Why am I buying a suit? Okay? It's for work. No. That says, even though you might have bought it so that you can go to work, the answer is no. Okay? There's a famous case in this, which is actually similar to section 23G, but let's deal with it now. In the UK, there was a case called Maliloo versus Drummond, which is about UK tax authorities, where an advocate, or barrister as they call it, took the commissioner to court because she couldn't deduct her court robes. You know, they've got to wear all those funny dresses when they go to court and things like that, right? And she goes along and says, look, I don't even like being dressed up in this shit. I have to have it for work. The judge came back and said, no, man, there is a subconscious motive that you are warm and decently clad while you are at work, therefore get stuff not deducted. And it was actually applied in South Africa in the white safari suit case, where the doctors used to buy those white safari suits. They were thrown out as well. So all your personal stuff, is not deductible. Okay? Domestic and private expenses, including regarding your premises. The only time that you can claim a home office allowance is where you do not have an office at work. So if you're provided with an office at work, do not pass go, do not collect 200, you may not deduct. Oh, you can see, here we go, free consultation. Yeah, what's your question?
No, what's the difference between buying an overall for someone and someone buying kit to...
No, the employer will provide the overall.
But then, so the employer provides your suit?
No, but that's he's buying it for his employees. He's not buying it for himself.
Okay.
That would be an employee, that is a specific item of employee apparel, safety gear, and and it would be the employer who is buying it and giving it to the employee. So that would be a staff benefit which is specifically excluded from being taxed in the hands of the employee under the staff or uniform provision.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that we'll pick that up later. So, you can't claim your office if you got one at work. Yeah.
So if my house that I pay rent on is meant for my office, I have 2 rooms, one to sleep in and one to do work.
Yeah. Do you have an office with work?
No, that is not.
Then you can claim it. Okay. Expect resistance from SARS. Okay. Now comes the next one. Do I claim my office at home? You don't see an office of mine yet. Do you think that that's a tax planning technique that I've got so I can claim my office at home? No, I don't claim my office at home. Why? Because then part of my home is not my private residence when I sell it. And I don't get a universal exemption from capital gains tax. It's not my home. I'm saying part of my home is not my home. Well, that has a secondary consequence when it comes to the day that when you ever sell it. So you see how you've got to think pretty laterally on this one, okay? Next one. Any loss which can be recovered through insurance. You can't have a loss that is underwritten by an insurer, claim that loss and then for tax purposes and then reclaim it for. If you've got a loss that's insured, you can't claim it. Any penalty or interest charge levied by SARS. Now watch this one. Okay. In the old days, we used to use SARS as the banker of the company. When you ran out of money, rather than get an overdraft, you just didn't pay your VAT or your PAYE over on time. Never, ever do that anymore. Because if I go and borrow the money from a bank, that interest will be tax deductible. Okay? If I borrow it from the receiver of revenue, even though I'm using it in the same business, it's specifically not deductible. So it's double the cost, and when I pay it back, I will pay a penalty for paying it back. We'll look at penalties a little bit this afternoon. Capitalized to reserves, we're not going to worry about that much too much. Okay? Any expenses in respect of generating income that is not taxable income. That's generally expenses to produce dividends. Okay, and then this is the one that we bang off a lot about. An expense to the extent that it is not laid out specifically for purposes of trade. Okay, so this one gets analysed and beaten to death. And this is where they look at an expense and they say, is there another motive in your expense? Okay? This is one that I have to be very careful about because I have expenses, personal expenses, and I have business expenses. Right? So I fly around all over South Africa and all the rest of it. Can I claim these clothes? No, I can't. Can I claim my car? Yes, I can. What I do to account for that is I run 2 credit cards. I run the personal credit card and the business credit card. So that you can identify it properly every month for SARS, etc. Okay. So if they can identify another motive, okay, then the expense becomes non-deductible. That becomes very interesting, particularly when one looks at entertainment in business. Okay? So, travel and entertainment. I can say I am worn out and need a holiday. I'm going to take somebody and go for a weekend to a hotel and recuperate. Now, what happens then? There's a subconscious motive that you're enjoying yourself. So therefore, it's not deductible. Okay? I can only go and do things I can't enjoy for tax purposes. But then I take another view where I've got a staff member, my staff, and I say, let's go away for a corporate weekend in a business. Now they come to the business and apply the same test, and they say, that's not for purposes of trade, we were having golf. We're golf now. And you say, no, looking at it from the business perspective, that is all part of my business. Okay, the staff might have enjoyed it, but it was for purposes of business, it's deductible. And we have this round quite a lot with SARS, where SARS sticks its nose into things and tries to say that is excessive expenditure. Okay? Now, excessive expenditure has nothing to do with whether it's deductible. So, I can have one website open on buying air tickets to Joburg. Economy class can be at 900 Rand. On the same page, the business class is 3,600 Rand. They are equally deductible. If I'm going up there on business, it's deductible no matter what the quantum. I can even go as far as to say, I'm chartering a private jet to take me to Joburg and back. So long as I'm going there for business, the quantum of the expense is not the issue. It's the act of the expense that's the issue. Okay? Labour broker, you can leave labour brokers out of it. I don't want to have a look at that. And personal services providers, I don't think you need to have a look at those. So those ones you can delete. Okay? Restraint of trade payments we'll talk about a little later under the individuals. Okay? No amount for a restraint of trade. Okay, but this is also an important one. No expense is allowed if it is an activity contemplated in the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. A bribe. Bribes are not tax deductible. Now you can turn around and say, bribes, I only paid that to get the business. I mean, I've been convicted of bribing somebody. Why else would I have done it? Of course that's deductible. Then the Act comes back and it says, we don't care if it's incurred in the production of income and everything else. It's not deductible anyway. That would be against good public morals to grant tax deductions. So it's taken out. This one has caused a problem, not on expenditure locally, but where South Africans have gone into other countries and they have made payments to government officials. Sometimes it's called fleecing. To get facilitation. Do you see that? If you have paid a bribe, that's a bribe. And there are different levels of bribes. And this, sometimes a bribe is not recognized as being illegal in some countries. But if that payment is illegal in terms of the South African Act, then it is not deductible. Yes?
Can you categorize the bribe as casual labor?
No. No. Casual labor is not a bribe. Casual labor is where you've paid somebody to work for you and to get something done. What SARS can come along with on casual labor is to disallow it and say, because you haven't got proof of who you paid it for and it's paid to non-registered taxpayers, we are disallowing it on that basis that you can't prove that you incurred the expense. That's how they get onto casual labor. If you get a really sticky SARS official. So penalties, etc., they are out. Okay. Insurance policies I will deal with under individuals. Okay. Deduction of dividends, not too bad. Right, so what we've done there is the general deduction formula. There is a separate provision for legal fees. If your legal fees are relating to capital expenditure, your legal fees are not deductible. Wouldn't expect you to know that in exam. A repair is deductible so long as it doesn't improve the asset beyond its original production facility. So if you take, for example, let's take an aircraft operator. If they buy a new engine for an airplane, that is capital expenditure, even though it's replacing an old one that has been worn out. However, if they take an old engine and they regenerate it and have it overhauled, the total amount is deductible. Providing at the end of the day, the output of that engine is no greater than it was when it started. Again, it's a principle that I wouldn't be too worried about. Pension fund contributions and then provident fund contributions, we will deal with those when we look at them later on, because I'm going to teach you the new principles that are coming in from next year. So you can ignore pension and provident, okay? 11M is payments to former employees. They have to have a specific provision in the Act to say the following payments are, if you support a previous employee, are deductible, and they put a cap on them. And the reason is that paying a former employee doesn't produce income in the future. So it has to have its own provision, but I wouldn't test that. Retirement annuity funds are also under pension funds, which we're going to deal with under T, after T, and so are insurance premiums. Right. When you start a business, you may not start deductions until claim deductions until business actually commences. You have to add up all your businesses, all of your expenses, and only when the wheel starts turning and you actually start trading does the expense become deductible. Okay? There are special provisions for research and development. I wouldn't want you to look at that either. Then there is finally one here, which will come into a discussion later today, which is 18A donations. Right. If I make a donation, let's discuss this one in detail because I want you to understand this one. If I make a donation to a business, from a business, to a worthy cause, is it tax deductible? No, it's not. Generally not. And it's actually, if somebody would like to write an essay about this, I'd be very interested. There is a case, Pick and Pay Wholesalers, Raymond Ackerman. Now remember, Ackerman was Mr. Big Image Man, right? And he used to be on the board of Pick and Pay and also on the board of the Urban Foundation in Cape Town, which did a lot of good social philanthropic work. So he gave them a massive donation to help them along. And of course, he publicized it all over the place. Ackerman's very good at that. I'm giving you money, but I want to be seen there. I'm the boykie, right? That's how Ackerman works. So he claims it as a deduction, and SARS comes back and says, that is not expenditure for purposes of trade. That is expenditure with philanthropic motive, charitable motive. And there was a major row in the Supreme Court of Appeals, and it was held that SARS was right. If there is any motive that is not related to trade, any trace of it, then the expenditure is disallowed. Now that was, I think, 1989 or something like that, as that case happened. It's quite some time ago. And since then, we've got all these CSI provisions in that fix it. A lot of people do what Ackerman was doing years ago. You've got billboards all over the place. Our CSI project. And you say, well, you gave money to this or that group to make and that's philanthropic. And therefore the expenditure is not deductible. And Dennis Davis and I are actually looking at this in the Davis Tax Committee at the moment, because everybody is saying we need hubs, little business trusts, throughout South Africa to assist small business, whereby we can get business to give money in to facilitate small business. And they recognise that in the Act, in a special provision for a special type of trust like that. We won't talk about that today. But they haven't said that if you give money to this, it's deductible. So, there we have a big building. How do we get donations to a university tax deduction? There has to be a special provision, which is section 18 capital A, which allows corporates to make tax deductible donations. What you will find about 18 capital A is that it is mainly in the field of education that these deductions are granted. So if you want to make a donation to Rhodes University, you will get a certificate, and that certificate, the amount on that certificate is deductible, but it is capped at 10% of your taxable income. So that immediately then creates a little problem. Because now parents come along and they say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a donation of 100,000 rand from my business. I'm not expecting to get a bill in return for having my child doing an MBA here. In fact, it wasn't really at universities this happened. It went rife in the private schools because they also get 18A donations. So you'll get an old snoozle notice in Andrews and say, I'll give you 200,000, but please don't send me a bill. It's got tax deductible school fees. And this was exposed right throughout South Africa in various schools at this went on. So the problem is now that they've tightened up these provisions under 18A. And they have said, yes, you may make a donation to a university and that can be tax deductible. But you can't nominate a specific student to receive the bursary coming from that donation. So I'm going to show you later, I'm going to show you how we're going to fix the problem. So what we would like to have is a situation where your employer comes to me and says, I'll give you a donation, you educate my staff member. That would be lovely. I'm going to show you how we're going to solve it in a moment. We can't solve it through 18A. Okay?
I've got a question. When the Rhodes gave the donation to my family to pay for salaries, was it tax deductible?
Rhodes is not a taxpayer. Rhodes is an universities are exempt from being taxpayers. So we can't claim a tax deduction. Okay? Similarly, Makana is not a taxpayer, right? Okay, so that one's tax neutral. It's just a question of whether we could afford it. Okay. So, you may make donations to an institution, right? And that institution can use it to give bursaries, but through 18A you can't claim a tax deduction. You've got to find another way of doing it. We'll do it after tea, because I'm going to build up something pretty, I think you'll think it's pretty hip by the time we finish with it. Capital allowances. Now, there are different capital allowances that business gets. You get expenditure incurred. What we've looked at now are revenue expenses. Your ongoing year-to-year expenses, where the benefit of the expense does not last more than 1 year. And then you get capital expenses, which are where you have capital expenditure. How long may you write it off over? Okay? And so we've done the general deduction formula in 23G already. Okay, and the specific allowances, right now under capital expenditure, there are specific capital expenditures. And what you have got to look at there is that there are a load of different ones. Whether you are a lessee or whether you have got movable property, there's a different deal for small business, there's a different deal for trademarks. Well, you're not allowed to deduct trademarks anymore, but designs and patents, fixed property and other allowances. Those are contained in sections 12 and 13 of the Act. not examinable. Is all I'm expecting you to know is that when you buy assets, there are different tax allowances for different types of assets. They are all listed in the Tax Act. I'm not going to ask you to understand how a lease improvement works, etc. Because if you were setting up a lease improvement, you would do it through the, use a tax nerd to help you. There are all the interpretation notes for write-off periods for some assets. Plant and machinery has a special incentive if it is used in manufacturing. You write it off 40% in the first year, then 20, 20, 20 thereafter. So there's a faster write-off for plant and machinery. So there's a special provision for it under Section 12C and 12B, but I'm not expecting you to know that. I'll spend a little bit of time on small business and SPC rates, but I think we need a little break at that point. So we've done an hour and a half. Let's give that one a break.